Israel ended up saying was that these were preemptive strikes, that they had gotten word or they had gotten intelligence that Hezbollah was about to launch a major attack, and that this preemptive strike preempted this attack from Hezbollah, which would have launched thousands of rockets into Israel. We still saw attacks from Hezbollah, hundreds of rockets and drones towards Israel, and they were meant to target a military base within Israel itself, at least according to Hezbollah sources. And so there was a very, very heightened escalation in the early morning hours of Sunday. But it's unclear if this was escalatory or not. But military analysts are saying that this was essentially effective in terms of deterrence.
Okay, so if it was effective deterrence, is it effective at deterring more than just what was understood to be an imminent strike by Israeli intelligence? And by that, I mean, if they were specifically going after Hezbollah missile launchers, did it take out enough capability that Hezbollah poses less of a threat to Israel now if it decides it wants to try retaliation again?
Well, I mean, Hezbollah is the best armed non-state actor, perhaps in the world. So it has hundreds of thousands of drones and rockets. So this doesn't necessarily wipe out their capabilities, and they've been able to rebuild their capabilities quite quickly with the support of Iran. So I wouldn't say that this is a long-term deterrent strategy, but what it was a way for both Israel and Hezbollah to say that they did something in the aftermath of the assassination of Hezbollah leader Fouad Shukr late last month, and also Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. That said, Iran still has not conducted its retaliatory strike for that assassination the way that they had promised to. So it's unclear if this is peace for the long run or if this is just a momentary pause. At the moment, most people believe it could be just a momentary pause, but at least long enough for people to go back to their normal lives.
Well, and so this notion about Iran potentially deciding to take retaliatory measures itself, when we saw Iran launch the attempted strikes on Israel back in April, the drones and the missiles that were largely intercepted, everybody said, well, Iran did kind of telegraph what it was going to do in sending those slow drones first. So there was a warning that it was coming. Now Israeli intelligence picked up that Hezbollah was getting ready to strike and tried to counteract that before it even could happen. Does that suggest that Iran potentially is going to trying to avoid that same ending, try to actually land a blow against Israel this time?
It's possible. I mean, it would make them extremely vulnerable to a wide-scale attack by Israel. We now have two U.S. carrier strike groups in the Middle East at the moment, but it's difficult to remain on high alert for a very long time. And so it's probably Iran's strategy to wait this out a little bit until that high alert kind of diminishes. And that's an effective strategy as well, because if they can connect it to the failure of ceasefire talks, which we haven't discussed yet, but ceasefire talks remain ongoing, but without any kind of conclusion. Yeah. And in fact, there's been an escalation in Gaza of Israeli attacks there. So Iran could effectively point to that failure and the assassination attempt in the weeks ahead when it goes ahead with some kind of retaliatory strike. But it needs to be careful because it does not have the competitive edge the way that Israel does.
Well, Natasha, I do want to talk about those ceasefire talks, especially given the description we got on the progress from Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor who spoke in Canada over this weekend. Take a listen.
It is incumbent on all parties in the region to work towards de-escalation and stability. And so we are feverishly working in Cairo as we speak with our team and the teams of the other mediators, as well as with the Israelis, to get to a ceasefire and hostage deal.
Natasha, does it feel to you like all of this feverish work is going somewhere?
It seems like there's feverish work to prevent a regional escalation, and there's certainly diplomats that are working on the ground nonstop on these talks. But we've been talking about the same sticking points in these ceasefire negotiations for months now. And some of that is the control of the Philadelphia corridor, which lands between Gaza and Egypt, and the Netzarim corridor, which is sort of halfway between the Gaza Strip. But in the meantime, Israel has ordered an evacuation of areas previously described as humanitarian areas. And this is after people have been displaced dozens and dozens of times. And we have reports of polio breaking out in Gaza. So this feverish diplomacy that we've been hearing about for months seems to be delayed. Hamas has left Cairo, where the negotiations were happening, saying that they resented the fact that Israel was trying to change the stipulations of previous potential agreements in July. So it remains to be seen. I think Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, also has to deal with multiple constituents, those on the far right who refuse any kind of ceasefire negotiations, and the rest of the country, which frankly wants a pause to this fighting.
And Natasha, we just have a minute left, but I do wonder about the role of the U.S. here and whether it continually is getting ahead of itself. Joe Biden, at the end of May, outlined this multi-step plan, saying that this was the agreement and parties just needed to sign off. It obviously didn't happen. They're still working on the same framework now. Then Antony Blinken last week suggested Israel has agreed to this, making it seem like the finish line was in sight, and yet it very clearly is not. Does the U.S. need to stop trying to paint this as more done than it is in public?
I think their strategy has been trying to push Netanyahu by going public with these kinds of agreements and make it seem essentially inevitable that there's a ceasefire agreement in place. And of course, there's political reasons for this as well, where we have a presidential election very soon. And so getting a ceasefire agreement or acting like a ceasefire agreement is imminent is in their political interests. But it remains to be seen if there is an actual sort of military pressure put on Israel by the United States, if Israel would actually agree to this.